It's June 25th, 2024. Andy P, Big G, Fans First Sports Network, Level Up College Football Podcast in the building. We had to come on a Tuesday this week. We got a lot going on with me and Andy P, but we're going to make sure we get all we got to get in. Because, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? It's 7 weeks and counting. It's time to ride. It's time to go. It's college football season. Back in the building. Andy P, what's cracking, bro? What's going on with you?
You know, we're trying to survive this heat wave in New York City. You know, AC's going at full strength, working on dealing with some allergies. So if you see me blow my nose on the live stream, I apologize. Promise I will mute before you have to hear any of that stuff. But otherwise, we're doing great. We're doing great. How about you, Big G?
Man, like the weather, the heat just left us and just pushed on over to you in New York. It left Ohio and it's sort of cool and all whatever else. Y'all over there getting smoked. So I get it, bro. I get it for sure. But like I said, man, Andy, listen, I was just looking at the schedule and like, dude, we're right here. Camp starts like next week. Like next week, right after the 4th of July week, we're in. It's camp starting. It's time to go. It's college football season, bro. It's that time. So I'm hyped and ready. We got a lot of topics today. Before we get to the Big 12 stuff, because I know we got folks out there listening to us in audio and video, and they're watching this on video live on YouTube. We got a couple of things we got to clear up and take care of. Because you know how we get out, Andy. We're going to said some stuff, and some stuff happened, and then some more stuff, and it's that Anstrodamus, Gistrodamus type thing going on over here. All right? So listen. Me and you have been talking about, I think since we found out that they were going to go to 12 teams for the college football playoff, how was they going to figure out how it's weighted and what it's weighted? Because I know one of the previews we're doing today is the Big 12, and I think they're getting a biased approach taken to them already. So I think we need to clear up for our listeners and the people that watch us live on YouTube about what is going to be the criteria for the committee to make their selection for the college football 12-team playoff this season. And Andy, I want to get your thoughts early on this because I got a couple of things, but I think we're on the same page, but I want to get your thoughts early on it, man.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest question that we have that hasn't been answered yet is what does this look like with the realignment strength of schedule changes? Because at the end of the day, when you look at, again, just looking on paper, the Big Ten and the SEC have a huge advantage here because of the marquee teams that they play. And it helps them out because let's just say, I don't think this is going to happen, but let's just say Penn State, they're a preseason top 10 team for sure. Depending on where you look, they might be top 7, top 5, but they've got a tough schedule. They could drop some games early and they could drop into, bottom 20s or even unranked if things don't go the right way.
Yeah.
But does a Penn State win or a Penn State loss mean the same as, say, losing to SMU or losing to Iowa State or Arizona? And the answer is that we know, you and I know from following the sport a lot, the name matters just as much as the actual ranking does.
Yeah.
And I am not inclined to believe that the SEC and the Big Ten don't have a huge advantage in this new format, especially when you consider that there was so much negotiation this offseason to get the automatic ACC, automatic Big 12, automatic Group of 5 champion into the playoff, because you don't do that unless you kind of have it in your head going into the year that the field is predominantly going to be tilted towards one or two conferences.
Andy, I agree. I think that the SEC and the Big Ten have an outstanding advantage, a huge advantage to be able to place teams into the playoff. But I got this sneaky feeling, bro, I really do, that there's going to be some bias there this year, right? Because this is the thing. The parity, I think, in college football and the cross-conference play this year where you're going to have legit Big Ten teams playing legit SEC teams, legit SEC teams playing legit Big 12 teams, legit Big 12 teams playing legit ACC teams, right? And we've heard for years that head-to-head don't matter. But I think it's going to matter this year. When you start looking about how did my conference stack up against this other conference as far as when we played against each other. And then now I'm the champion of the team that beat you down. I mean, of the conference that beat you down, beat your conference down. Man, we might get some. I think this is going to be the first year in the conference room when they get to fighting and talking. It's going to be a lot of arguments in there, yo. I think it's going to be bad, you know.
And we saw that last year with the Florida State debacle, where it was clear going into the last week of the season that they did not want Florida State to go undefeated. They were looking for ways to keep Florida State out of the 14 playoff once it became clear that Washington and Oregon were going to end the season the way that they did. And once it became apparent that you weren't going to get, like, you weren't going to be able to exclude a Pac-12 team because Washington loses to Oregon in the rematch. Right. I think if that happens, Florida State is in the playoff and Washington is out of the playoff. But when that didn't happen, they then start going around and saying, like, well, we can't leave out Texas or Alabama. So how do we get rid of this undefeated Florida State team? We come up with a reason that's, you know, frankly, kind of BS when you look at what the playoff is supposed to be and rewarding teams on what the season is. And I think that that's where all of my questions for the committee are around this concept. How much of this is going to be rewarding teams for what they did versus projecting what they might do? And what I think is going to be really interesting about this is that historically, the rankings, when you look at teams in the perspective of what did they do, that's the eye test. That's just like, who did they beat? Who did they beat in the one-on-one matchup? Did Texas beat Alabama? Great. Texas is above Alabama now. When you're talking about projecting teams, that's when you start getting into these advanced analytics that I personally love, but a lot of people really don't like because they end up with wonky scenarios like last year where Ohio State was above Michigan in most advanced analytics for 9/10 of the season because those analytics are looking at, you know, let's take this team and play 1 million games and simulate it 1 million times and see what happens versus the intrinsic weirdness of college football, which is you get one game a week. You're playing with, you know, they're not amateurs per se, but they're definitely like in their first experience in this professional-like environment. Mistakes get made all the time. Like that level of variance is what makes the games fun to watch. But it seems like these advanced metrics that project what teams can do are going to become more important and thus devalue what actually happens on the field. And I think that's the biggest concern that everybody has after what happened with Florida State in last year's playoff rankings.
Andy, listen, that is 100% accurate what you just said. And I'm going to tell you, I know because I know you're an analytical guy and I know you look at numbers and all whatever else, but this is the part of the matrix that I looked at as far as how it works, right? This year, you're going to get teams that's going to play each other probably twice. And we're talking about 6 or 8 of the top 10 teams are going to probably play each other at least more than once. You could get a conference matchup with Michigan and Ohio State back-to-back, or Oregon and Ohio State. You could get Penn State, Michigan. You could get Texas, Alabama. You could get Georgia, Texas. I mean, back-to-back different matchups where they're going to double up and play each other. And I think when you start calculating the matrix moving forward, now do you want to see those teams play for a third time? Because we've never seen that in college football. It sells in the NFL where teams play two times in a conference, and then if they match up in the playoffs, you're like, oh, this is the third time's the charm. But I think that they're trying to sell the brand and build a brand. So I don't see them having, okay, three times we play against each other and this, that, and this, because there's going to be too many variables where they're going to lose money because people are going to get sick of watching that. So that's why I'm saying, and you correct me if I'm wrong, why I think that the numbers are going to come into bigger play because they're not going to want to see teams match up against each other 3 times. They're just not going to want to see it. You know, your thoughts on that, bro?
No, and I think that what we saw last year was that, again, this is fundamentally a TV product. This is no longer about rewarding programs for the work that they do during the year. It's about creating a compelling TV matchup that can compete head to head with the NFL. Like we're going to like, this is something that, you and I didn't dive into fully when we talked about the schedule breakdown of the college football playoff, because like, truth be told, I'm not the biggest NFL guy in the world.
Yeah.
But the college football playoff is going to go head to head with NFL games for the first time. And I think the reality of the situation is we know that the NFL is going to outdraw college football 9 times out of 10. But what if you get that opening round game where Alabama has to travel north to Happy Valley for the first time ever? And it's where winner go home, or winner stays, loser goes home, and the playoff continues. Like those stakes have never been involved in a college football game before. And that would be going up against a meaningless NFL Week 14 matchup that in the grand scheme of things probably doesn't matter nearly as much.
Right.
And this is where I think, to your point, the numbers and the analytics are going to be used more than ever to justify decisions that on its face might not make sense based off of the eye test and based off of what we think has happened so far this season. And again, I think it's going to be fascinating to see. I think we're going to talk about it a little bit here. There are 2 conferences that I know are going to get screwed in this process, by far. And I'm not sure there's anything that we can do about it unless they magically get 2 undefeated teams going into the second to last week of the season.
Hey, Tim Lyons, check out his question. That was a good question that he asked, man. And normally I don't be giving Tim a shout out, but on this one, it's a great question. Tim said, what would happen if a conference champ loses to a non-conference opponent? What if that non-conference opponent goes undefeated? That's absolutely right. And that's the metrics that Andy's talking about right now, how it's going to work, because that weight is going to play a big part in saying who gets an opportunity to go here and where, versus where, before, like you said, Andy, it's always been the eye test. And I don't know if the eye test is going to be able to get it this year, especially when you're going to get teams playing 2 and 3, possibly 3 times,
Yep. And I think that, Tim, the example that you're kind of hinting at here is the one that we talked about a little bit last week in our ACC preview. Florida State plays Clemson during the regular season. They also play Notre Dame during the regular season. So we have a real scenario here where Florida State loses to Notre Dame but beats Clemson, and rematches with Clemson in the ACC title game where Clemson beats Florida State. So you have a Florida State team whose only loss on the season is to Notre Dame, but doesn't have a conference title. Doesn't have the conference title win, but we know that they can play good teams. We've got a Clemson team that has, not necessarily beaten the best opponent, but won the ACC. And you got Notre Dame who's sitting here undefeated, who's pointing to their marquee win being devalued based off of how their conference schedule went. So again, I think what you're going to see is the challenge that the committee has is going to be between ranking a 1-loss and a 2-loss team against each other. Because so far what we have seen, they've made it abundantly clear. 0 losses automatically get the top. 1-loss teams next, based off a head-to-head. And then you get your 2-loss teams all together. I do not know if this season we will see every single 1-loss team ranked above a 2-loss team. And because the metrics will say that some 2-loss teams are better than the 1-loss teams. And that is where I think we're getting into the heart of this issue here. And what I want to talk to you about, Big G, is we're looking at this conference allotment for a 12-team playoff, man. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be even distribution throughout all the conferences.
Then we know, and that transitions to our next question, man. What's our prediction as far as the 12-team distribution? If I had to weigh it out today, Andy, and it's just my thoughts about it, bro. I would say SEC 4, possibly 5. I would say Big Ten 3, possibly 4. I would say if Notre Dame loses 1 game, Notre Dame, and then you figure the rest out. That's 2 spots available, based on now, but they haven't played any games yet. And so that's why I think that could be the nail in the coffin and actually cook the conference playoff committee's opportunity to try to weigh it like that. Because when that head-to-head starts happening and you got teams from one conference whooping another conference, then now you're like, wait a minute, bro, we can't just arbitrarily throw 5 from one end because they got beat down by this one and that one from the other conference. So that's just my early thoughts about it, Andy. What's your thinking, man?
Well, the biggest question, and this ESPN kind of raised this in their article asking questions of the committee. We know that there are a guaranteed bid going to the ACC champion, the Big 12 champion, the SEC champion, the Big 10 champion. Those are your top 4 seeds. The number 5 through 12, those remaining 8 teams, are going to be 7 at-larges and the number 1 group of 5 champion. Last year, that would have been number 14 ranked Liberty, meaning that no matter what happens, you are probably bumping out a Power 5 program for a group of 5 champion. Now, what is going to make this even more interesting is that the committee has said, if none of the group of 5 goes undefeated and ends up ranked this year, they will hold a separate ranking for all of the group of 5 champions. And then that unranked number 1 group of 5 champion will be included into the playoff. It is almost guaranteed that the group of 5 champion is going to be the 12 seed. And the committee is lucking out into the fact that right now the Sun Belt is actually putting together some really solid football. Like, we're not relying on the MAC anymore to produce an independent. We saw that with Liberty this year. Like, the American Athletic Conference has some good football programs this year. Like, I don't think we're going to be in a situation where the group of 5 champion is going to be unranked. I do think that they're going to be less than number 12, and you're going to bump out a team. So this is where I think that we're going to end up getting a really interesting distribution where I think we get 1 group of 5 team, 1 Big 12 team, 1 ACC team, 1 Notre Dame. That's your 4. And then the other 8 spots, 4 and 4 Big 10 SEC.
Andy, listen, I hear you. I hear you. But let's talk about it. Like, because we always talk with the weight at the top. The Big Ten's got Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. Those will be the 4, right? I think those 4, if you say, okay, most people are solid with that. But when you flip over to the SEC, you got Texas, Georgia, Missouri, Ole Miss, Oklahoma. Who am I missing? And I got a sleeper, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Right. So you got those 5, and then maybe look at LSU, who's 6. And now you're talking about, wait a minute, man, how can you leave? And some folks is out there screaming Texas A&M. Right. So now it's like, wait a minute, hold it. You know, because we already know it's going to be the big bias. We know that's going to happen. Right. But if it goes down like that, then there's where that cross thing starts happening, because the preview that we're doing today with the Big 12, some of those teams play those SEC teams. Some of those teams play those Big 10 teams. And if they pull out dubs, bro, you're not going to be able to get away with it. There's no way. The bias is going to have to end this year. If not, there's going to be anarchy. You know, and that's why I said that room is going to get bad, bro. That room's going to get bad. So that's why I'm like, you know, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I think that as we kind of talk about this, the most interesting part is going to be within the Big 10 and the SEC. Last year, in both conferences, we saw a very clear stratification take place where in the Big 10, it was Ohio State, Michigan, and everybody else. Like when Penn State, who was probably the 3rd best team in the Big 10, when they played Ohio State and Michigan, it was clear that they were just not of the same quality. In the SEC, we saw Alabama, Georgia do that as well. Not to the same extent as we saw in the Big 10, but like when Bama played, say, an Ole Miss, like it really wasn't that close. When a Georgia played a Tennessee, it really wasn't that close. And what the most interesting part to both conferences is that they are adding in the best of the Big 12 and the Pac-12 from last year, where the Big 10 is adding Washington and Michigan, or Washington and Oregon, and the SEC is adding Oklahoma and Texas. So let's just pretend that those 4 teams in each conference make up the stratification layer of like, these 4 teams are clearly better than everybody else. I am really intrigued to see if one of those 4 teams in each conference end up collapsing under the pressure. All 8 of these teams that we have talked about have undergone massive transitions in one place or the other, with Michigan going through essentially an entire roster overhaul of their starting 22.
Facts.
So there is a good, like, if you are a Big 12 fan, if you are an ACC fan, you are hoping that one of these teams is just going through too much change in one cycle. And that's where maybe you, as the number 2 team in your lesser conference, could sneak your way into the playoff, but you're going to need to only lose 1 game the entire way out. I think that if an ACC team loses 2 games in or out of conference, Big 12 team loses 1 or 2 games in or out of conference, they're done. They're out of the playoff.
Right. But Mandy, I'm siding with you. I'm riding with you. I'm co-signing with you, right? But like I said, there's that cross conference. Because Andy, you watch the ACC, you keep a bird's eye view. Who does Clemson play week 1?
I mean, they play a Georgia team.
I'm just saying.
I'm with you. I just don't think that Clemson's gonna win that game. Like, but this is where, again, to Tim's question, when we're talking about, like, how can the ACC play itself out of a second playoff spot? Clemson loses to Georgia but wins the conference. Like, that would be the worst case scenario there, especially if they lose a game to FSU in the regular season and then win the conference with 2 losses. Because at that point, like, I don't. Oh man, like you could get real fun with this then, where you've got a 2-loss FSU and a 2-loss Clemson and a 1-loss Notre Dame. And what are you supposed to do here? I don't know. I have no idea. It's again, to bring it all home. You were right. Like, this is where the metrics are going to come into play, and I don't think people are going to like the metrics because they're going to go against the eye test.
Yeah, and that's what's going to be different now. Put a bow on it. This is going to be the hardest pick, the 12, because this is the last year for the 12. We've already got conference expansion for 16 for next season. It's already done, right? Yeah. So it's going to be easier to get those teams. You're not going to have to worry about leaving teams out. But that's why I said I think that this year, and I think you've been saying the same thing, this year is going to be the hardest champion. The best champion is going to be this season because the metrics is not going to line up with the eye test. And some of those traditional powerhouses that we know and love, it's not going to be sitting there in that playoff. And you're going to be like, how in the world did they get left out? You know, and then therefore, hey, there you go. There's your conference champion. All right. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. So listen, we're going to take a quick commercial break on Fans First Sports Network, Level Up College Football Podcast with Andy P and Big G. If you're watching us live on YouTube, just give us a second to play a few bills. We'll be right back. But if you listen to us on audio, whatever you get your audio podcast, Google, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, give us about a quick second, get a word from our partners, and we'll be right back with the Level Up College Football Podcast. And we're back with the Level Up College Football Podcast. Andy P, Big G had a great first half of the show, bro. Because we're not just going to be biased and talk about just what we like, our teams. We're going to give people information for sure, talking about how the complexity of this college football is going to look because you've never seen it before. But before we even get to the next subject and next topic, I got to say, what's up with my boy Andy, man? What's cracking with you, bro? What's going on, man?
I'm really excited. I just got my tickets for my first college football game of the season. Going to go to see Syracuse and Stanford play. I think it's week 3 up in Syracuse. Friday night ESPN game. Should be a really good time. Hoping to make it up for one other Cuse game this year. Maybe see another game somewhere else around the country. But you said it was 7 weeks. It's 7 weeks away from week 1, man. Like, the football season's here. Season tickets are flying off the gate. Like, buying, like, individual game tickets are going on sale. It's time to start getting your plans ready for Saturdays in the fall.
Get your gear ready and get your time up. But while you're doing that, make sure you listen to the Level Up College Football Podcast because we're going to have some information for you every week to get you ready and keep getting you hyped as we move to the beginning of the 2024 college football season. Andy, Big 12 playoff breakdown, Big 12 team breakdown. Big 12, well, whatever you want to say. Now, listen, before I get this preference, right? Before I get to this, because I know it's going to be a lot of chatter out there, and I'm gonna start some mess. I'm gonna hit him with some G Stradamus. Andy, I did an in-depth look at the Big 12, man. I mean, I really sat down and looked at it. I'm gonna make a statement, man, and I need everybody out there that's listening to us and watch us hear me loud and clear. The Big 12 has the best quarterback play in college football. Top to bottom, 1 through 16, they have the best quarterback play in college football, period. Anybody wants to argue with me about the SEC, the Big 10, or whatever else, let's get it cracking. Let's talk about it, because I looked at who they got in that conference. Andy, they got like 7 or 8 dudes that's going to be playing next year in the NFL, bro. They got some dogs over there, bro. They got some dogs. I'm not playing. So when you have good quarterback play, you got to have good play. True, Andy?
I mean, it's funny because when you let's look at the first team, second team, third team, fourth team quarterbacks that have been coming out. You've got some combination of Cam Rising and Shedeur Sanders for first and second team. That is a 1-2 punch that can match up with pretty much any conference out there right now, especially considering that Shedeur is getting talk of being the number 1 quarterback off the board in next year's NFL draft. But then you go to the third, to the next level of guys, and you're looking at Noah. I always forget how to say this guy's name. It's Noah Fifita.
Fifita from Arizona.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the guy who I think is the most electric of all those guys. Like Shedeur can obviously run and he can move, but Fifita last year was the only reason Arizona was winning games. And then you've got Rocco Becht over at Iowa State. You've got Garrett Green at West Virginia. Like, they are a interesting conference of names of guys who I think we will see this year all take step forward. I don't see anybody on this any of these guys that we're talking about poised to be in a position where they take a step backwards because they're losing weapons or because they're system guys. Like, these are all true quarterbacks. And to your point, Big G, I think that's what's going to make this that might be what kills this conference overall, because no team is going to be out of a game this year because they're going to have the quarterback play to drag them back into any sort of matchup. And like, when we start going through the team rankings, like, I'm not super high on Colorado as a team, but the fact that you're going to have to play against Shedeur Sanders, we saw that last year. It means that every single game that Colorado is in where you do not put them away in the first quarter, you have a chance to get burned in the third, fourth quarter of a game.
Andy, listen, you didn't even mention guys like KJ Jefferson, the transfer from Arkansas to UCF.
Yep.
Jaden Daniel, the quarterback at Kansas, that's electrifying. Yep. Avery Johnson at Kansas State University. Finn, the quarterback that transferred from the University of Toledo down to Baylor. Andy, they got dogs in this conference, bro. And I'm going to co-sign with you in 100% by saying that these guys in this conference, this quarterback play is going to be off the chain. I mean, they're going to have defense that's going to be played. Don't get me wrong, because we'll highlight a couple of guys. But I'm looking at 1 through 8, 1 through 9 at QB. Bro, they can run with anybody. They can run with anybody, for real, man. And a lot of those kids are going to be playing on Sundays, a lot of them. So that's why I'm like, okay, listen, the Big 12 might be the Cinderella story of the season. And that's why I'm getting sort of hyped about it, because quarterback play dictates what happens. And listen, we saw it last year. They DQ'd Florida State because they didn't have a quarterback.
Yeah.
Well, when you got a conference full of quarterbacks, now how you going to leave somebody out? That's all I'm saying, Andy. Does that make sense, bro?
No, it totally makes sense. And obviously injuries were a huge part of why Utah and Cam Rising last year were never able to put it all together, even though we talked about him probably 4 or 5 times on this show. But if he can stay healthy this year, if he is really the Cam Rising that we were billed on last year, Utah is my pick to win this whole conference, because I think that they have the best overall team and they've got a top 2 quarterback in the conference. Like, that is a recipe to go undefeated and win your conference. The only reason that I'm not like super confident on that is because we've got Kansas State sitting right behind them. We've got Oklahoma State and Iowa State right behind them as well. And the way that the Big 12 schedule works, you have to run through the gauntlet in this conference. And I mean, it's wild to say, but I think BYU or Houston are the worst teams in this conference, and I think BYU or Houston could finish, top of most Group of Five conferences and probably finish not in the bottom of the ACC.
Yeah, I would say legitimately BYU and Houston could win both 6 or 7 games. Both of those teams legitimately could do it. But that's because we're talking about the overall quarterback play, so we see a drop off in that. But with the rest of the conference on it, and listen, we didn't even talk about the conference champion who played in the conference championship game last year, Oklahoma State. Guess what? Yeah. Oklahoma State's quarterback is a 7-year senior. He's a COVID year senior quarterback, and they had the best running back probably in the country who's coming back. They returned 18 to 22 starters. So how could we not mention Oklahoma State by them actually being a good team? You see what I'm saying? And like, oh wow. They got a quarterback too. So Andy, man, I'm hyped. I'm hyped about it. But let's start out. Let's be fair. Let's talk slow because I'll get ahead fast, right? Right now, who's your coach? Who's the best coach in this conference? Number one coach.
I mean, at the end of the day, when I look at what Kyle Whittingham has done at Utah, man, he has the peaks and he has the consistency. There is just this is his 20th year as head coach at Utah, which is astounding. But what he has done with that team to just turn them into a consistent power in the Pac-12 and now put them in a position to potentially win the Big 12 this year, I think that he is very clearly the top coach. The one that I am most excited about from a coaching standpoint, though, is Willie Fritz at Houston. I have been a big Tulane believer for a while now. I really thought Tulane was going to get the invite into one of these conferences, either the ACC or the Big 12. I actually thought that the ACC should have taken Tulane in its round of expansion. It just makes a ton of sense to expand the footprint and add a quality football program. But I'm not sure that they're going to be that now that Willie Fritz is no longer the head coach there. I don't expect a lot out of Houston this year because Willie Fritz is not a portal guy. He is not a big, splashy, do-it-all-in-one move guy. But Houston has been a sleeping giant for years in the American. Now that they're in the Big 12, give them a couple of years here, and I have no doubt that we are going to be talking about Houston as one of the predominant powers in the Big 12 for years to come.
Yeah, Andy, I got to give you credit. Utah's coach is an outstanding coach, but I'm gonna show some bias, man. I'm going to show some bias. I'm going to be honest, man. Chris Kleiman, man, is one of the best coaches in the country at Kansas State University. He is, man. He builds programs, bro. He builds it. And he's got a monster out there right now, man. They're my sleeping giant. I mean, when we'll get to him, we'll talk about it. But his ability to be able to lock into a program and build those guys up is unheard of. If he was in a Big Ten, I would be scared to death to have this guy come to like a Wisconsin or like a Nebraska or like a Iowa. I would be petrified because I'd be like, oh no, this guy will go get 3- and 4-star talent and turn them into monsters, and that's why I give him my preference as far as coach. Now, the flair, who's got all the flair. We'll give him a little credit early on in the show because this ain't all about Colorado, but Prime's got that flair, bro. Prime's got that flair. And a lot of coaches are like, wait a minute, this guy is actually more just than talk. He's assembled a coaching staff there that includes Warren Sapp, these guys are ready to ride, bro. They're ready to ride. So I guess maybe dark horse coach is Colorado, but I think the Big 12 is across the board filled up with great coaches. Your thoughts on that, bro?
Yeah, I really like this conference top to bottom. And I think that the crazy part about the Big 12, and I probably should have led with this, is that this is a conference that pre-pandemic, we left them for dead. When we talked about the conference realignment happening, we knew that the ACC and the Big 12 or the ACC and the Big 10 were going to be the power conferences. Everybody assumed that the ACC was going to be that third tier with Miami, with Florida State, with Clemson, with the additional bodies that they had added. And the Big 12 just kind of sat back and got aggressive and weird and tried some different marketing tactics. They tried some different expansion tactics. They got really good at college basketball. And all of a sudden, we're sitting here going, if college football contracts any further, it's the ACC that's cooked well before the Big 12.
Facts.
And I think that this is the great experiment of, can you have a conference when everybody is very good, but no one is elite? And I think that that's what I like that. And that's coaching. That is coaching. And as we talked about at the beginning, that's quarterback play, because those are the two things in college football that are going to keep you head and shoulders above the rest. And I'm looking at West Virginia as a great example of this. Like, that was a program that we wrote off. We were talking about how they were going to be the first team looking for a new coach last year. And after that 2-3 start, they stuck with it, and they ended up improving in a way that I didn't think that they could do. Neil Brown has a proven track record of winning elsewhere, and now he's got an extension at West Virginia. And the assumption is that West Virginia is going to be probably the top of that middle class of the Big 12 this year. They'll probably go 8-4, 9-3, but they're going to be a very tough team to play. And historically, they've been a tough team to play at Morgantown. And if that's the kind of program that's like in your middle class, that has a very good coach, is a historic power, is tough to play on the road, that's when you know you've built a great conference top to bottom.
Andy, listen, and there it is. We always circle back to points that are made, for sure. They play Pittsburgh and Penn State this year.
Yep.
they play ACC Pittsburgh and a Big Ten Penn State. So here's one of those middle of the pack teams that, okay, we dust off Penn State, we pop Pitt, we got 1 or 2 losses. Bro, how can you leave us out? We handled our business. You see what I'm saying? So that's why I'm like, and there's a lot of that going on this year in the Big 12. There's a lot of that where they're playing teams and you're like, wait a minute, we don't expect that particular team to win. And so that's why I'm hyped about it even more. All right, so Andy, listen, we're going to take one more quick commercial break. So now when we close out with the last 20 minutes of the show, we're going to give them everything that they want. If y'all listening to us and listening to us on audio, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your audio podcast, give us a quick commercial break as we get a word from our partners, and let's keep it moving in the grooming, and pause for a second on the YouTube Level Up College Football Podcast with Andy P and Big G. And we're back with the Level Up College Football Podcast. Andy P, Big G, Fans First Sports Network, talking Big 12 football, bro. Andy, we're going to give them what they want, man. We got 20 minutes. We're going to go. All right?
Yeah.
We're going to go. All right? I want to know from Andy, who's a football expertado, whatever you want to call it. He's a guru, y'all. He's the guy. Who's the best player in the Big 12? Who's the number one player in the Big 12?
Number one player in terms of pure, the ceiling is the highest, and we can see explosive plays out of him every single snap. It's Travis Hunter, by far and away. Travis Hunter might be the best singular talent in college football this year, and it's well-deserved. Guy can play both sides of the ball in a way that we haven't seen since his coach. He's got the ability to disrupt a game on both sides. We saw that last year. He needs to get stronger and he needs to stay healthy, which looks like, based off of his offseason, like that's been the goal. So I'm confident we're going to see more of him. But if you're talking about the player who I think in the Big 12 is going to have the most output and the most impact on his team winning, it's Ollie Gordon of Oklahoma State. I have a running back bias. I love a classic workhorse running back that only exists at the college level. Ollie Gordon is a beast. And we talked about him a little bit last year, but last year was the worst rushing rate of any team that Gundy had at Oklahoma State. And part of that was because the quarterback play was so inconsistent. They were rotating between 4 different bodies all season long. Teams just stacked 8 in the box and said, you know what? We know that we can stop this. Ollie Gordon still put up really good numbers with that being the case. And so with an improved quarterback play this year from Oklahoma State, I think Gordon is going to have a monster season, and I think that he will end up at the end of the year being the Big 12 player of the year, even if Travis Hunter is the best player in the conference.
I agree, Andy. I'll just say this. I think that as long as Colorado is winning, and if they win more than 7 games, you will hear Travis Hunter's name mentioned as far as the Heisman Trophy because of the sheer numbers and him being able to stay healthy that he'll put up from an offensive, defensive standpoint. And when we're talking about a player that probably will be, if you're not going to say the Johnson kid, who's the cornerback in Michigan, will probably be the number 1 corner off the board and definitely a top 10 NFL pick, right?
Yeah. But
I'm going to give you a sleeper, bro. I'm going to give you a sleeper who I think could possibly win Conference Player of the Year. His name is Tetriola McMullen, wide receiver, Arizona. Andy, he's the number 1 wide receiver in the country. Listen, I done watched the film. I sat down on him, bro. He's the number 1 wide receiver in the country. If the draft happened today, he'd go 1. He'd be the first WR off the board. He's that good. He's really that good. So I'm looking like, okay, does he got the quarterback? Yes. Does he got the offensive scheme? Yes, because he retains his offensive coordinator. But what he lost was his coach. So I'm like, okay, because his head coach went to Washington. So I'm like, okay, is this guy going to handcuff this kid? Or is he going to say, look, this is my bread and butter. And this kid is what's going to get me to the victory. If he does, ladies and gentlemen, he'll have 100 catches. I promise you. If he uncuffs him, he'll have 100 catches. The kid's really that good. He's better out of his breaks than probably – there's maybe 3 or 4 wide receivers I've seen in the last 2 years that's better out of his breaks, has the ability to get open, will catch everything you throw to him. My comp on him is a bigger, stronger, faster Jamar Chase. That's my comp. That's my comp. I mean, I've watched film. I've been in that Patreon film room, all 22, and I've sat it down. And I've watched him with the clicker, and I've looked, and I'm like, this dude is a dog. And then when I saw him play against NFL cornerback competition last year, he cooked them. He had one game where he had 16 catches, 178 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I was like, man, no. Come on, bro. Come on, let's get this kid in the NFL right now. So I think because Arizona might be my sleeper, I'm out there teasing it. Arizona might be my sleeper to pick to win the conference. I think that kid could win Conference Player of the Year. Your thoughts, bro? Your thoughts, Andy?
No, if Jed Finch was still the coach at Arizona would be my pick to win the team. And it says a lot because he obviously went to Washington and then took 10 starters with him on the roster. And, Brennan, who's the coach there now, Brent Brennan, who's coming from San Jose State, did a really nice job in the portal doing what he could. I just don't know if the depth is there, but you're right. Fafita, tossing it up to this guy, Tetriola McMullen, like that is how Arizona is going to win games this year. I just don't love the depth. Like when you're talking about the top tier of the Big 12, Kansas State has better depth. Utah has better depth. Kansas has comparable depth, but has better explosivity at a lot of the other positions outside of quarterback and wide receiver, especially on defense. But if we're talking dark horses, the one I know that we haven't talked about Oklahoma State much at all. They obviously were in the title game last year in an amazing run. They're somebody you should watch out for, but I think the most improved team in the conference might be TCU. This was a team that got their teeth kicked in last year. They lost a lot of players from a historic team, and they took a giant step back last year. 5-7 was not what we wanted to see. But we know that Sonny Dykes can coach an offense, and we know they can score points. Last year's team was the worst defense that TCU has had in its entire program history. So the floor for TCU is 5-7 with a solid, not great offense. I think that Josh Hoover coming in as a sophomore is going to be a little bit better there. But they have a 3-pronged receiver group of all seniors. And we saw last year at Missouri what you can do when you have a veteran or high talented trio of receivers all kind of come in and coalesce around a quarterback who is not necessarily the best, but has potential.
Yeah.
I think TCU is going to put up a lot of points. I think every game with them is going to be a track meet. And I think that is going to get them in a position to challenge, say, a Utah if the offense isn't clicking for a game. They get UCF and Kansas early in the season in September. Those are two opportunities for easy marquee wins to put themselves in the conversation as a favorite in the Big 12.
Got it. Andy, top 4 teams, your prediction, top 4 teams for the Big 12 this year. 1, 2, 3, 4. Matter of fact, I'll take some pressure off you. You ain't got to tell me in order. I just want to know who's your top 4 teams. Who you got as the top 4, and then we'll talk about the conference championship game and then the conference champion. I want to know who your top 4 teams are.
Yeah, I said it off the top. I think Utah, if Cam Rising is healthy this year, their defense is too good, and Cam Rising is too good for them not to go 11-1 at worst. And their toughest game of the year, they do not have a very difficult schedule. They play Oklahoma State in week 4 on the road, and they play Colorado on the road in week 10. So they have their two toughest games are spread out. I think they can do those easily. Afton, I think Kansas State's going to be number 2. They are just an all around really solid team. We talked about Chris Kleiman and the work that he's done there. Their challenge is that they have a heck of a stretch where they have to play Oklahoma State, at Colorado, at West Virginia, home against Kansas, at Houston. That I'm sorry. I don't know how you can, if they win that stretch, they're winning the conference. I just don't know how you can come out of that stretch undefeated in when you've got those 5 games back to back like that. That is just unkind. Number 3, I like Arizona. I'm with you, Big G. I think that they're a really solid team. I think they have the best quarterback wide receiver duo in the conference in terms of true production. And yes, I know who Colorado has on their side there. But I like Arizona a lot. And then number 4, I think, is Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State is just a really nice team. And again, I love their running back. I think that Ollie Gordon Jr. is going to have a Heisman caliber season this year. He got 1,700 rushing yards last year and won the Doak Walker. I think I think that he might be closing in on 2K rushing yards this year.
Oh, hey, Andy, 2K is a Heisman.
Yes.
Hey, listen, I don't care what you say. 2K with a 10-2 record, you're the Heisman Trophy winner, bro. 2K, because it don't happen in college football. Not no 2K. You know, so yeah, I feel it. I feel it. All right, so listen. This is my 4. Now, I know I'm gonna catch flack for this, bro.
I love it.
But I'll be on that clicker, bro. I'll be on that clicker. I hit that clicker and I start watching. Now, this says no order. This is no order. It's just my top 4 teams. All right. I'm going to start with Oklahoma State University. I think with 18 or 22 returning starters and Ollie Gordon and a 7th-year quarterback, you can't deny them. Yeah. You can't. And they were in the Big 12 championship game last year against Texas. And if they would have had, listen, if they would have had Sanders, the quarterback that they had the year before, playing quarterback for them, they might have beat Texas last year in that game. They just couldn't throw. Yeah. You know, and Texas played 8-9 in the box, and it was like, no, we're not going to let this dude beat us. Right? So I like Oklahoma State as one of my top 4. Number 2 top 4, I like Kansas State University. I think that Avery Johnson at quarterback with Kansas State and the maturity that they're going to have, because they were a very young team last year, which means that when you're young, you have a lot of guys that played and a lot of returning starters and a lot of guys that has experience, right? And I just think that with Kansas not having a home game this year, by the way, because Kansas has to play at Kansas City Chiefs because they're getting an upgrade of their stadium, the all eyes of the state of Kansas is going to be on Manhattan, versus Lawrence. And I think that's going to give where the state is in totality or in whole is going to get up behind them. And I think that Kansas State could mess around and, be right there at the end. So I like Kansas State. I like Arizona, right? I think that Arizona, even though they lost a lot to the portal, I think they hit the portal. And I think the portal itself, with that quarterback and with that, because they have really a wide receiver trio, like you were saying, and bro, they will throw the ball all over the yard. I'm telling you right now, don't be shocked if they're in the top 5 scoring offenses in college football when it's all said and done next year. They're gonna hit you for 40. You know, I'm telling you right now, they're gonna get you 5-6 touchdowns. You better ride up, because if not, you're done. You better be able to score with them, because them boys gonna hit you for about 40 plus. So I like Arizona. Andy, this is where it's all gonna get started. Colorado's a top 4 team in the Big 12.
Woo!
They're a top 4 team. I'm telling you right now, they are. I looked at their schedule. I looked at their strength of schedule. I look at how hard they hit that portal. I've been watching all 22 film. I looked at the skill player positions that they have come back in. By the way, you know they got Dallin Hayden, the running back from Ohio State, to come in and start the running back for them. So they're not to be messed around with. They're going to be a top 4 team, because I don't like Kansas. And I think that Cam Rising is still – I watched the documentary on him, man. If he's able to play at 60% of what he was, okay, yeah. But I don't see it. His leg is tore up, bro. You know, now I'm wishing him all the best. And he might have the biggest brace you ever seen on a player, right? You know, ever, right? But yeah, Colorado, they got too much talent, man. The portal ability for Colorado, I think, will pay off this year. Now, am I saying they're going to win 9-10 games? No. But are they a top 4 team? Yes, because of the parity in the conference. So that's my top 4, Andy. You got any disagreements or one you think like, man, no, there's no way?
I'm telling you right now, week 1, Oklahoma State has to play South Dakota State, who just recently big power in the FCS.
Mm-hmm.
Colorado has to play North Dakota State.
Big facts.
One of those teams is losing in week 1 to an FCS opponent.
Ooh.
One of them will lose. And I'm putting my money on North Dakota State to beat Colorado in week 1. I think that it's the perfect storm, and how Colorado responds to that game with Nebraska up next and Colorado State after that will go a long way in buying me into this version of Colorado. Because I'm with you. They won the transfer portal in a way that they had not done in year 1 with Deion, but they still are relying on the portal to rebuild the offensive line. And last year, like, I fell for Shedeur, man. Like, we have all seen the Derek Carr when it happened live in the NFL level. Yeah. Shedeur is a lot better than Derek Carr. But that man was doing the same thing. Like, he had to take a 20-step drop if he wanted to be able to see anything downfield, because the pressure was just in his face the entire time. And as Colorado will only work if that offensive line can get right and get right quick. And I just don't know if it's there. But
they got 2 5-star. They got 2 5-star offensive linemen that they brought in this year for last year's class.
I know, but that, right? Offensive line is a cohesive position. It's not 5 individual guys. It's 5 guys working together as one. It's the hardest part about football to coach. It's the hardest part about college football to recruit. And I'm not a believer in Deion yet when it comes to the trench warfare. I do like that he brought in Warren Sapp, because I do think that that's a level of experience, at least on the defensive side of the ball, that is going to make the offensive guys better by going up against that kind of technique. But yeah, man, I think North Dakota State beats Colorado in week 1. That's my hot take. We got some Colorado hot takes here.
Yeah, that's why we do the Level Up College Football podcast. All right, so Andy, your Big 12 championship game. Who you got?
I think Kansas State's going to play Utah, and I think Kansas State's going to win. I think that Kansas State is going to come in with maybe 1 loss, but they're going to beat Utah because, like you kind of said, you were kind of hinting at it earlier, I think Cam Rising is going to be very good. I think their defense is going to be very good. But if you give me a single game, I just don't know if he's got that it factor that he used to have. And we'll have 12 games beforehand to know if he can recover from that. But in a single game, like, we know that Kansas State can get up for a single game. We know that they can give better teams all that they can handle. And so I think if you give Kansas State an opportunity to win and get into the playoff and like put themselves once over officially over Kansas and be the Big 12 rep, I think that 1, Kansas State's in the playoff. 2, guarantees the Big 12 only gets one team going to the playoff if they've got a one-loss conference champ.
Mm-hmm. So I like the Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game. I do like that. I got a different team, though. I got them playing Oklahoma State in the championship game.
Yeah.
I got Kansas State versus Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. And I think that Oklahoma State gets it done this year. I think they do. I really think that Oklahoma State has an opportunity to possibly go undefeated. I could see, because I looked at their schedule, I looked at their strength of schedule, and I'm like, man, they can pull this off. You know, and with all those returning starters, so I like Oklahoma State. But in the Big 12, which is the wackiest conference out there,
yep,
anything can happen. Because guess what? Guess who we didn't talk about and who I think is a sleeping giant? The University of Central Florida.
Yeah.
They're a sleeping giant. Matter of fact, I want to almost say this. They're on par with Florida State as far as the best team in Florida. They're on par. They're better than the Gators. University of Central Florida is better than Florida, than the Florida Gators. So anything can happen, and it's all going to come down to quarterback play, right? So saying all that, last thing, who or how many teams, well, you said it already, but I want to see if you're going to stick with it.
Yeah.
They're only going to get one in? They're only going to get one in?
I think they're only going to get one in. I don't think it's necessarily going to be fair. I don't necessarily think it's going to be great, but I just think that, well, again, look at the teams that we were talking about, wrapping this, going all the way back to the initial conversation that we had. Talk about Utah, talk about Kansas State, talk about Oklahoma State, talking about Arizona. These are not sexy helmet teams. These are not teams that have traditionally been college football powers. These are not teams that, you know, your New York, your LA audience is going to tune into. It's not a team that, you know, guy in Happy Valley is going to turn on because he knows about the storied history of these programs. And unfairly or not, in the case of Kansas State and Oklahoma State, they've got rivals in state that are probably better known than they are, even if they've performed better in recent memory. And I agree that that's not fair. But when we talk about what the committee is looking at when they're looking at TV matchups, I just don't see it outside of the conference champion getting in, even though I don't think it'll be ultimately fair based off of how good the Big 12 is going to be.
Andy, I got to agree with you. I think the Big 12 will only get one in. I really do believe they'll only get one in. But I think that they're going to have the largest or loudest argument in the room. I think when it's all said and done, I think the ACC will not have as loud of an argument, because I think with those cross-conference rivalries, and I look for the Big 12 to do very well against other teams in other conferences. I think I looked it up where they're going to play 14 games where it's against other Big 10, other big time opponents. If they're 10-4 or better as far as a conference, hey man, start the argument and start the debate. But I do believe that they only get one team in the college football playoff. All right, so Andy, look, we're to the end of the show, man. Great show. Any final thoughts before we get out of here, bro?
I think that the takeaway that you should have here, if you didn't already, like, watch some Big 12 football this year, man. Like, if you are out there and you're somebody who doesn't normally watch anything outside of, you know, your team, and you're looking to try to grow college football this year, you can watch the SEC, you can watch the Big 10. There'll be some great games that are going to be happening there. But I think some of the best football is going to be played in the Big 12 this year. They're this year's Pac-12. Like, we're going to be talking about the Big 12 a lot this year on our week-to-week previews when we're talking about the best and most interesting games.
That's big facts, man. Hey, listen, thanks again for listening or watching another edition on Fans First Sports Network, Level Up College Football Podcast. Make sure you come back and swing back next week on Monday with me and Andy P as we get out and break down another conference and bring you all the latest and breaking news concerning college football. As for me, Big G, and my boy Andy P, we'll check you guys next week on the Level Up College Football Podcast. Peace.